Welcome to the Unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about all things Unreal Engine and also the geometry of sharks trying to eat giant peaches. We're your hosts. My name's Alex, and next to me, welcome back, it's
Jacob. Well, thank you. It's been a while, folks, and I got to say, Alex, you're getting pretty fast with that intro. I feel like you got that out quick. We're getting this podcast down to 30 minutes, guys. You quit. All right, we're going to talk really fast. All right, and by the
same
end,
content half the time.
yeah, exactly. Just speeding through it. All right, but anyways, it's good to be back. It's been a crazy. I think it's been at least a month. So I'm happy to be back and chatting with Alex, and I hope you guys are excited for what's to come. There's been a lot of changes since I was on the podcast last. GDC, we got a new release in preview. Lots to talk about. Where do you want to start, Alex?
Ooh, don't forget to rate, comment, like, subscribe.
Oh my
which is
God.
something I completely forgot to say.
I forgot my
entire time we
job.
were
Yeah,
gone, but I just remembered this moment because I was expecting you to say it.
Yeah, no, I forgot my job there. Thank you for keeping me honest.
Yeah,
But
I'd say let's start with a little, just to give everyone an agenda. I think what we'd love to cover is some of Jacob's travels, especially GTC, because that seemed to be a more momentous event this year than in past years. I've attended virtual GTCs before. I didn't even know there was a physical one in person this year. And then I saw photos of this giant stadium and I was like, holy cow, this is like a real thing now. And then I want us to talk a little bit about the 5.4 roadmap, which is now available and up behind us. I want to talk a little bit about my travels, Apple Vision Pro updates, and maybe give a little tutorial, a little thing about if people want to be able to swap pawns in Unreal Engine easily and access some different kinds of game modes. Is there an easy way to do that? And the answer is yes, I will show you. So let's start with just you, Jacob. Let's hear a little travel log, so to speak.
yeah, sure. So in March, I was right next door to GDC, where the State of Unreal happened. That's in San Francisco. I was in San Jose at GTC, formerly known as the Graphics Technology Conference. Now it's the AI conference, as happens in the year 24. But it was a really interesting experience. First of all, there was something like 17,000 attendants at GTC, and this was the first in-person GTC for, I want to say, at least 5 years. And of course, since then, they've gone from, I want to say like a 90, $100 billion company to a $2 trillion company. So I think everyone's expectation coming into it was that it was going to be a big event, since they're very much at the forefront of a lot of news right now. But yeah, I think it lived up to a lot of those expectations. I was telling Alex just before we started. So Jensen gave his keynote in the SAP Arena, which holds, I guess it was packed to the brim, and it wasn't all the attendance. So I think it holds at least 15,000 people. And it was completely packed.
Crazy.
And those people were all there just to listen to Jensen get on stage and talk for 2 hours. And it was just Jensen.
2 hours. Wow.
2 full hours. He didn't bring out any special guests. He didn't, he showcased some work that their customers are doing. So there were videos with other people talking, but he was the only person on stage the entire time, which is, I think, very much an indication of his style as a CEO and as a leader at NVIDIA.
Did it feel scripted, or do you think he had did he have a teleprompter, or was it kind of like, I've got some general bullet points I want to hit, but I'm mostly just here to do like a John Carmack stream of consciousness sort of thing?
I mean, I think it was scripted, but he did go off script a pretty good amount, because it's not like he has to pass the mic to someone else. He doesn't have to set up anything other than the videos and presentation they have planned. But yeah, I'm sure they had a pretty tight script overall that he was sticking to. I mean, he's a pro at this now, right? He's been doing these sorts of keynotes for a long time. So it comes across very natural, but also very casual, which at times is a bit weird. Because especially when you're in, I think it made sense for that casual kind of attitude when it was a room with a few hundred people, but with 15,000 people all staring at you, to have this kind of casual attitude, I gotta say, was a bit strange at times. But overall, I mean, I think it was the big mic drop moment was the announcement of the next generation of GPUs called Blackwell.
Mhm.
um, and it has a lot of people uh, thinking, excited, fearful. I think there's a lot of emotions to describe. But overall, it was an exciting event. Now the actual like show floor, and there's obviously tons of talks. There were talks by, for example, the folks who wrote the original Transformers paper, which is like the paradigm of AI model that's taken over the world. So they had a lot of really high profile names giving talks, and that was interesting. But it's also just kind of over the top at times. Like there were a bunch of booths, including ours, that had ice luges for like cocktails and taking shots. So like you'd go to a booth and they would like take your drink and pour it through like an ice luge in the shape of your company's logo.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a bit over the top at times, but a lot of fun overall, and really a really engaged, like busy crowd. Which, from my perspective, given that I spent most of my time just talking to people at our booth, it's nice to at least have people who know what they're talking about and are engaged. So yeah, overall, it was a good time. I hated missing the State of Unreal this year, given that it was so close. But the best info I could find said that I needed to buy a full like $3,000 pass, and that just wasn't going to happen. So yeah, so did that, and then got home, and a day later flew off to Europe for more of a vacation. But got back, and as folks know, things pile up when you're traveling. So it's been a while catching up, but I'm happy to be back on the podcast, and also happy to be home for a little bit before before back on the road again. How
Yeah,
about
oh,
you,
man.
Alex?
When do you have to go back on the road?
Oh, I don't think I have conferences coming up, which is nice, but it's going to be like weddings. When it gets warm, it's traveling for that sort of stuff, which I don't mind. But I just wait for Unreal Fest. That's really the event of the year that I'm most excited for.
Me too. 6 months until the next Unreal Fest, for us, at least in the US, over in Seattle. Though I'm sure we'd both love to find an excuse to go to the Gold Coast or Singapore, or Shanghai or Seoul, or all the other places that's happening, Tokyo.
Yeah, I would love to do a tour of Unreal Fest events, but I looked at flights months ago for Gold Coast, and it was going to be like 3 grand.
Whew.
Um, yeah, I mean, you don't really want to fly coach for 20 something hours, so it's just expensive.
Yeah. Well, speaking of flying, I did a very interesting experiment last week, which was I had my friend Martin Murphy, who runs the virtual reality major over at Ringling College, which, first of all, cool, they have a virtual reality major. He
Yeah.
asked me if I could come down and sit in on some of the classes, do some guest lecturing, and then give a bit of a talk, especially with my work in Unreal Engine. And I said, like, I'm trying not to travel much these days because I got young kids, and they really get sad when I travel for too long. So I really try to only go to events when I can like bundle things together in multiple places and kind of have maximum impact. And just going to Sarasota, Florida to give a little talk, as much as I'd love to, just doesn't feel like the best use of my time at this point in my life. So I tried to say that very politely, and he's like, "Well, we'd really love to have you. Is there anything we could do to make this more attractive? Obviously you're getting paid, and we're covering your flights and your hotel and all that." And I said, "Well, I mean, it's going to be during my 6 year old's spring break. How do you feel about me actually bringing my 6 year old with me? So then he wouldn't, miss me. He'd actually get to be along for the trip and get a little bit of a better sense of what dad does when he's is on a business trip." And so, funnily enough, he's like, "Sure, I've got 5 sons. I could help out with like babysitting and all that." And we were off to the races. So I brought my 6 year old down on our flight. And you reminded me of this with the mention about like flying economy, because we did buy economy tickets, but fortunately, Delta upgraded us to Comfort Plus, which was
Yeah.
very nice. And there was this great moment where my 6 year old was convinced that there was no screen for him. But for some of the Comfort Plus seats on Delta, they don't put the screen on the back of the chair. It comes out on this like arm that
Yeah.
you then, have it right in front of you. So one of the most delighted moments I got from him for the whole trip was when he realized that the screen was going to be like right in front of him, and then he could, play Minecraft on a tablet, and then also be like watching, a Disney movie at the same time. He felt like he was in high heaven.
That
But
sounds
it
like
was a
your
really
son,
interesting.
Alex. I gotta say.
Yeah, yeah, pretty nice. And I have to say, I was very impressed with Ringling College's Unreal Engine program in particular. I sat in with, I'm sorry for blanking on her last name. I'll put a link to it in the description, but her name is Anna, which was easy because it sounds similar to my son's name. And Anna was teaching blueprints with widgets and sending messages and receiving them, and had this like really engaged class in a lab following along. And it was really cool to see everyone figuring this stuff out and doing their own flares. I was very impressed because these are a lot of Unreal technical artists in training, that they were, adding all these other things to their work. They were doing new things with fonts and doing curved, beveled edges. And surprisingly, none of them have played yet with the new motion graphics tools in 5.4. But I understand the
Yeah.
curriculum gets made like before the semester starts, so it's a little hard to jump into that stuff. But they did have some time at the end of that class, so I hopped in to do kind of an impromptu tutorial on physics simulation and blending physics simulation with walking around. So if you want to use the third person character, for example, and have the lower half of the body still just kind of do your standard walk cycle, but you want to have the upper half of the body basically simulate drunkenness and like start to dial up and down like the amount of physics that start to make the body sway. It was a nice little 10-minute tutorial, which it's a while since I've taught that particular class. It came from a class that Alex Pascal had made that I've taught for Epic Games before, and I blanked at one spot. And so it was very transparent. Like, I can't remember how to do this part of this right now, so I'm going to do what I've been doing a lot lately. I'm going to pull over ChatGPT, describe the thing I'm blanking on, and then ChatGPT helped remind me that there was a slightly different node that I wanted to use versus the one that I was using. And I was also targeting the wrong bone in the skeleton. So, I think it's useful to not just show people, here's something working perfectly, but here's also what troubleshooting looks like when something is not working perfectly. And I got a
Yeah.
nice response from the students on that. Also got to
Super
see
true.
some thesis students showing their latest work. Also got to see a really cool character design class where they were throwing up everyone's characters on the screen and kind of critiquing, where lines might have been too straight and where there was too much symmetry, and how hair could be done differently. I also got to hear Martin make a great comment where he said, "Did you do the clothes here in Marvelous Designer?" And the student says, "Yes." And he says, "I thought so. Everything in Marvelous Designer out of the box looks like it was made with trash bags." And now that he's said that, I can't really unsee that. And now anytime I see someone getting started with Marvelous Designer, it's like, yeah, it does kind of seem like all the fabric is just like these poofy trash bags. And it does take more effort to actually make it look more like leather or felt or other
Yeah.
kinds of materials. And then I gave a talk, and it was really fun, except for the fact that my son was pretty much done. It had been a very long day. And so while I'm giving my talk, everyone in the room was very tolerant of the fact that he was like running around in the room back and forth. And despite Martin's best efforts, he could not be contained. But yeah, it was cool. It was also Accepted Students Day. So there were a bunch of parents there with their kids who were going to be part of the next class. People submitted a bunch of note cards. I posted on my Twitter some of the questions people asked me. And the Q&A went longer than the actual presentation. I talked for maybe 30 minutes, and then it was about an hour of Q&A. So it was really cool to engage with the students there. And we also did some fun things like go to the beach. There's a beautiful beach out there that has like clay sand. And then we went to a mini golf course called Smuggler's Run or something like that, that had live alligators. So you do the mini golf course and you feed the alligators.
Whoa.
And then we went to the airport, and it was a very fun, quick 2-day business trip that my 6-year-old got to have a lot of fun on. So it worked out.
Nice. I mean, that sounds like a win-win overall. And yeah, I didn't know that a VR major was a thing. That's quite cool.
Not only do they have the VR major, they also have a VR minor now. So I got to hang out with a couple of the students who are coming
Oh,
from
cool.
other majors, totally different. Ringling College, of course, is famous for their computer animation program. They funnel a lot of their graduates over to Pixar and Disney and
Yep.
DreamWorks. But yeah, my favorite thing about virtual reality is the fact that it has such a wide variety of backgrounds. People come into virtual reality from journalism and theater and architecture and games and all that. And so it was cool to see that actually in a microcosm at Ringling College, where so many of the students are doing totally different things, but they're also getting a VR minor. By the way, I just saw this statistic this morning. It might be totally made up, but it said 33% of teenagers now have a virtual reality headset, which is like 30% more than I would have expected. That's
Yeah,
kind of crazy.
that is pretty crazy. I mean, yeah, it's funny to see how adoption is changing. I do think actually Apple Vision Pro made a lot of people buy Quest headsets.
Yeah, I think you're right. And by
Just
the way, I
like
still check out.
FOMO, you know.
There's the FOMO, and I also still check out when I come into Grand Central in the city. There's the Apple Store right in Grand Central, and I've kind of started to make a habit of just peeking in and being like, "Are there people still having Vision Pro demos? How do people seem to be responding?" And it's kind of the same every single time. They've certainly reduced the number of Vision Pros at that Apple Store since launch, but they're still there. There's always demos. People are always smiling and pinching and getting really excited, and you can tell Apple is doing more to spread the word and evangelize this medium of a face computer than Meta has ever done, just by the
Yep.
nature of giving these free demos at all their stores. You
Yeah.
can't buy that kind of distribution with anything that Meta has at its disposal. Boots on the
Right.
ground, actual brick and mortar real estate, where people try to sell this stuff for themselves. Yeah, amazing. It's great.
Yeah. I think I remember back in the day when the Microsoft Store used to have Vive demos. That's where I first tried a VR headset. I want to say. Um, I think that's true. I can't remember, but yeah, they used to have the original Vive, and they do the what's the pirate
Space Pirate Trainer.
space pirate trainer, and of course the whale.
The blue.
Yeah, the blue. I remember those, and that was huge. I mean, that was that was part of the reason I got so interested in it was those demos.
Yeah.
So yeah, I 100% agree. You need some boots on the ground to sell it, but I do think Apple probably does a lot of selling for their competition, just given the price tag and who practically walks into an Apple store and tries a $3,500 device, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
it feels a bit like a service for the community, which isn't something I usually think of for Apple. I typically
right.
associate Apple with very walled garden, like me, 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 me. You're trapped inside this ecosystem, and
Yeah,
don't you dare try to get out. But just by the nature of them talking about their own product, a lot of people still have not tried virtual reality or anything like it. So a lot of people are learning it from them, which is pretty cool.
I feel like for a lot of people, for Apple, it's like the spectacle, right? Being
Mhm.
innovative and being, like I feel like that's a big reason. But yeah, I agree. It's I think they do it because they have to, not because they probably want to be showing people the ecosystem of VR.
Yeah, I agree. The video I've got playing in the background for our YouTube watchers is the little promo video that Ringling College has for their virtual reality major. And yeah, they got all the headsets, lots of different equipment. They do have a couple Apple Vision Pros floating around. Every student had a MetaQuest 3 on their desk, plugged in and set up, and it's cool. It's cool to just see students in Unreal Engine constantly popping into VR. And one thing I wanted to talk to them more about, but didn't get much of a chance, was why the focus on Unreal Engine. I feel like a lot of universities tend to prefer Unity just because it's a little easier to get started, but there seemed to be a really genuine commitment here. And from what I understood, there's no real official support from Epic here. There hasn't been any evangelizing where someone from the education team like came down to Ringling College and gave them like a bunch of support or reasons for why they should be using Unreal Engine. They seem to have picked it pretty organically, which is cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. I
There you go.
mean,
There's some blueprints. Oh, and there's Anna. Yeah, we just saw Anna for a second. Who fantastic teacher. Also really incredible at ZBrush. So the way that she's starting to incorporate ZBrush and that 3D modeling workflow, and then how to bring all that into Unreal is very, very cool. So
yeah, awesome.
there it is. Should I mention briefly Apple Vision Pro updates?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Let's do it. Okay, so for those who might have seen my LinkedIn or my Twitter, my Twitters, as I finally got to the point where I could hit 90 frames per second. It actually reads as more than 90 frames per second, which is weird because I don't think that's necessarily accurate in Apple Vision Pro. I have ambient occlusion on via mobile HDR. I'm in the forward rendering path. I've got my little hand tracking stuff. This is just like a brief little snippet, but it's working and it feels really good. And it's been a really awesome community effort because we've had work from myself, and I want to give a shout out to Spatial Biggs and Michael Becker, who have all been really amazing at making this kind of come to life and work. We all, I think, found little things that one of us had discovered and someone else hadn't. Spatial Biggs also put together a whole Medium article that kind of walks through how to get started with Vision Pro. They also made a video that also walks you through it as well. And again, it's an evolving process, but for anyone who's an early adopter and wants to try this stuff out right away, it's kind of working. It's working and it's working stable. You don't have black artifacts. The frame rate is good. We really would love to make pass through work. Michael Becker figured out that the reason why I was getting passed through is actually a little bit of a glitch. It's not something that is supposed to be happening, because when you're in full immersive mode in the Apple Vision Pro, it is supposed to be fully immersive. It isn't supposed to show you pass through, but there's something to do with the Metal API and the renderer there, where it discards pixel data in a certain way, and then just because there's no pixel data, you just end up seeing pass through. And so I've done that inconsistently, but it seems like sooner or later Apple is going to fix that and it won't be possible anymore, which will be a bit of a bummer, because I really enjoyed like scaling down my world to the point where I could see my environment and then have my little VR thing there. Also, for anyone who feels like they want to be right at the bleeding edge of Apple Vision Pro development in Unreal Engine, I did, by popular demand, start offering a bit of a Gumroad course. Course is kind of a misnomer. It's a community, really, where I've got a GitHub template that is set up well for the Apple Vision Pro, which includes all the hand gesture stuff. It's a Google Drive folder full of, a FAQ and kind of the Google Docs that I'm updating for what I'm discovering with what works and what doesn't, as well as a Discord, just like a private Discord where just the people who have purchased this course or guidebook are all congregating to, stay right at that bleeding edge. So for 99% of Unreal Engine developers, I'd say, like, you don't need this. Use the guides that are out there. Wait for more official support from Epic. Epic did also release their own little guide recently, which is great. But yeah, for anyone who wants to be tip of the spear, feel free to go to gumroad.com/iBrews and take a look. Let me pull up the Apple Vision Pro Unreal Engine Dev Guide. See if that pops up. There we go. Yeah, 6 days ago, Apple Vision Pro Quick Start Guide. It's pretty straightforward. It's missing some of the key steps, but there's plenty there to help people get started with the stuff you need to like enable hand tracking and all that. But the big thing too, by the way, that I've come to realize that I like so much about Unreal Engine's approach to the Apple Vision Pro is the fact that despite the fact that Apple is not using OpenXR at all, they're not part of the Kronos group, they don't conform to standards except Apple's. Epic, because they can, is kind of pushing all of the Apple API stuff for Vision Pro into an OpenXR framework, kind of a wrapper around it all. And so what that means is if you have an OpenXR project that you've built for Meta or Vario or Vive, it's pretty straightforward to bring it over to Vision Pro right now. And that's not the case with Unity. Unity really does treat, I think, as Apple wants you to, treats the Vision Pro as like its own special device. And therefore, everything you do to make something work for that device really kind of stands on its own. Yeah, like for example, the hand tracking that I've got going in Vision Pro right now, that's a template that my team had set up. Shout out to June, who we've had on the podcast. June had set up this template that did hand tracking really well through OpenXR, worked on Vive, Vario, Meta, and then I was pretty much able to bring that over and have it work Apple Vision Pro with very few modifications, and it just worked. So I really love that approach to, I'd say the spirit of OpenXR, which is like one plugin to rule them all, one way to develop some content and then have it work on a wide variety of devices. So feeling good about Apple Vision Pro and Unreal right now.
I am excited to see where it goes. I mean, still seems like there's a lot of work to do, and I'm still bummed that Apple and Epic won't play nice. I
I
also
know.
get it. Um, but man, uh, I, I I want the day to come where it's easy enough to use, and we get the V2 of the Vision Pro, and it's like it's a primary platform for Unreal. I mean, I
Yeah,
sure
the thing.
I yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sure I want that, and I'm sure you want it more than I do. But yeah,
Yeah, the thing I just keep thinking about is, like, I know Disney really loves using Unreal Engine. Like, so they've made so much content. All the Star Wars things, for example, made in Unreal Engine, Vader Immortal and Tales from Galaxy's Edge. They've really invested in Unreal Engine, as was on the virtual production side. And now that now that Disney and Apple, sorry, Disney and Apple have always been very close. But now that Disney has a substantial stake in Epic Games, it just feels like, Disney's going to be the grandparent in the room who like pushes these two together and is like, hey, play nice, everyone, like we really need all this to work. So at some point, everyone needs to kind of put aside their differences for better or for worse.
right. Yeah. Well, it will have to happen eventually, but
Yeah.
I guess we'll be waiting a bit.
Yeah. All right, should we move on to the new public roadmap?
Let's do it. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, a
Um,
bunch of the stuff that was just in the forward-looking tab had now been moved over specifically to a relatively new tab called Unreal Engine 5.4. Although it's funny that they put 5.4 after forward-looking, makes it seem like this comes later. But yeah, again, for those who don't remember the last time we talked about it, forward-looking is kind of meant to be this little sneak peek into stuff that is being developed at Epic Games. There's no timeline on release. It might come out in, the next version. It might come out in Unreal Engine 6. It's just kind of a cool little look at like all the stuff that's happening at the moment. But then when they actually move it over to a specific release like Unreal Engine 5.4, they're saying we are targeting having this stuff come out with 5.4, which of course is in preview right now. And based on the pricing model that was announced, they said that they're trying to have 5.4 out by the end of April officially. So that's when not only should all these features be good to go, but that's also where, if you're a millionaire or your company is a millionaire, you do need to start paying for your seats of Unreal Engine.
yeah. So I mean, there's a ton to talk about here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What caught your eye, Jacob?
well, I mean, the I mean, there's obviously sections here. The first one, being animation. I mean, man, there is so much stuff here. We saw the skeletal editor in experimental in 5.3, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's another step towards this being an all-encompassing, DCC application. Um, but I mean, there's so much more here. So, for example, layered control rigs. That was one of the things that a bunch of animation folks had been waiting for, the ability to um, like build more complex workflows for different types of animators, um, and have different granularities for different actions. Um, the improvements to animation authoring, the extensibility piece here, I think is really big too. So that's the top left one. Um, so like being able to write your own tools to extend this and make it easier. So being able to do this, like it says, with blueprints or Python, huge, because that means that it extends a lot of existing tooling. So Maya's major interface is they have their own, but the most popular binding is PyMel. So Mel is the name of Maya's native interpreter. PyMel is a library that was written to write Python for interacting with Mel, and PyMel, there's a ton of tooling written for animation authoring, and the fact that this is now in the Python interface is huge, because that means there's a ton of tools that are going to come over. So I fully expect we will see a lot of studios begin transitioning away from Maya. Is my guess. Like I think we're near that point. Obviously, a lot of stuff is still beta or experimental, so I don't think they're going to go all in for, let's say, something they have in production right now. But I think we're really getting to the point where I think there's going to be serious thought put into whether this should be the one and only tool for your next film, your next game, whatever it is. And I think that's pretty exciting. I mean, this was a pipe dream, I think, for a lot of people when it like people didn't think Unreal would ever be able to match industry leading animation toolkits.
Yeah, I'm glad you're pointing this out too, because I feel like a lot of the attention in what's new and exciting in 5.4 went to the motion graphics, formerly known as Project Avalanche, which of course is making a pretty large effort towards saying like, hey, maybe you don't need Adobe After Effects or similar kinds of comp programs. Maybe you can actually do it all in Unreal Engine. But everything that you're mentioning with animation, I think, is just as impressive and exciting. The idea that Maya, which of course has been such an industry standard for so many years,
Yeah.
might get to the point where you don't need to go over there as much would be incredible.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And um, I mean, even things so like at the bottom of the section, motion matching. That was a feature that shipped in Fortnite
Hmm.
with the last like big upgrade. And this was the sort of thing that major game studios implemented on their own. This is like a hot topic in terms of like where potentially AI plays a big role. Um, in the sense that the idea behind motion matching, as I understand it, is that you want to take the actual direction, momentum, speed of a character into account when you are transitioning between different animations or between two directions in an animation. So, like standard, well, games maybe a decade ago, it was pretty easy to see when this was not a feature because your character would be like climbing on stairs and then they would like get to the top of the stairs and their foot would glide up and
Right.
then you switch directions and it would like drop like it would be pretty obvious to see. For Fortnite players this was a big deal actually. I heard a lot of folks who were saying that they disliked the new movement because it seemed slow.
Mm.
Um, and for competitive games, that's a major knock. Now, in reality, it wasn't really much slower. It was maybe like the animations took maybe slightly longer, but that makes a difference for some people. But this is a huge tool for animation, for games that narrative driven games. So the fact that this is all built in production, tested in Fortnite, huge, a huge deal. Um, Anything else to add about animation? I mean, the next section is where it really goes off the rails, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see some of this being shown at GDC in the State of Unreal with some of the game projects that were coming out, and also the announcement that there's going to be, I think they said 500 AAA animations available just for the public to use. I know I'm going to open up that project and like really see how much I can push something
Yeah,
like motion matching. If I've got an obstacle that is 2 feet high, then 4 feet high, then 10 feet high, like how much can a little parkour move start to look believable as we
right.
go across all that. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
the
and
animation stuff's really
this was
exciting.
one of the things that they really touted with the Unreal 5 release was
Hmm.
motion matching and contextual animation. So it's good to see that like they're bringing those features to production. Like
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Oh, and I
Uh,
haven't played with it yet, but yeah, a lot of people I know are super excited about the upgrades for the
for
animation
retargeting.
retargeting, which already has seen some pretty significant improvements in the last couple versions of Unreal Engine, but now they've made it even more automated. And yeah, I'm excited to dive more into that since we deal with a lot of retargeting skeletons and animations and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited about this too. I haven't seen anything about it, but like the holy grail of retargeting is being able to retarget your animations to all sorts of different characters. There's an
Mhm.
awesome talk that I saw a long time ago about an engineer from Ubisoft who gave a talk about animation retargeting, where he's showing like, hey, we have this walk animation for a human, and then we develop a system where we can use it on a dog, like a
Right.
four-legged animal, and how you solve that problem. I think again, that's the sort of thing that like AAA game studios have been working on for a long time. But to have that as a tool built into the engine, yeah, really cool.
Yeah. And just a reminder for everyone too, if any of these features are like, oh my goodness, I need that as soon as possible, don't forget to actually go in here and hit that little button for how important is this to you, critical. And I guess if there's other things where you're like, don't waste time on that. If you wanted to, you could say not important, but that might be mean to someone who that really is an important feature for. But I do know Epic actually does care about and read, the comments people make if they say something's critical and then they explain it. Like it does make a difference on how things kind of move up the food chain. Same things with submitting bug reports. Epic does actually read your crash logs and all that. So the more information you give them, the more it actually does help the product moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Write actual crash logs, people.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
do it, but someone's got to do
that's right.
it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Rendering.
Nanite tessellation, before I forget, I just want to point out, and it's probably somewhere else in here, but skeletal meshes are now in 5.5 working with nanite. I don't think it's going to make it into 5.4, but it's really cool to see what nanite can do now with your animated characters. And, nanite and lumen and virtual shadow maps and world partition, all of these things really like to work together. And anything in your scene that is not one of those things, like a animated skeletal mesh, actually tends to have a higher cost than you'd expect because it's not playing nicely with everything else. So that moment when you actually can get to the point where everything in your scene is nanite, still
Yeah.
glass and that kind of stuff needs to be worked out, but everything nanite, everything lumen, et cetera, that's actually, I think, where we're going to start to hit some of the real performance gains of these new systems that Epic has developed. But this particular tab is about nanite tessellation and the actual displacement. You can get world position offset and whatnot, and that is already in the engine. I think it was experimental in 5.3 as well, and it's getting better.
Yeah. And this is a runtime feature too. So like
Oh
this is
yeah,
something you could adjust at runtime. So you can have a displacement map for like damage to a surface or specific features that you want to be able to adjust in real time. I mean, that's some pretty cool stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, material driven and animated displacement. So yeah, landscapes. Yeah, that's the last example there. Yeah, that's huge for a
Mm.
landscape, um, which typically uses a lot of tessellation. Yeah, deform a landscape in real time and like have nanite automatically bring in detail. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Um, Obviously there's other nanite stuff here. Spline meshes I think is cool. I don't think anyone's like jumping off their seat about spline meshes, but I think it is a pretty cool feature. um,
This one is really getting me, like Vulkan ray tracing, like please, yes. As many people may know, like Vulkan is a very common RHI for mobile phones, for VR headsets, and the potential of even an experimental version of ray tracing or lumen or nanite and all that working here would be phenomenal.
yeah, yeah, the Vulkan stuff is huge here. So yeah, having Vulkan and being able to, so in the previously released 5.3, you can get pretty close.
Mhm.
And there was initial support for, like, you could enable the ray tracing flags in Vulkan, um, and it worked, but it wasn't fully featured. It looked different.
Oh,
Um,
and to be clear, I think you're talking about like in some platforms like Linux. I think that would work. There was still no way to do that on mobile hardware, to my knowledge.
oh yeah, mobile. Yeah, I believe with Vulkan ray tracing, you still have to have a hardware device to do it,
Hmm.
which most mobile I would assume do not. You can do software ray tracing, but it's not advisable. But yeah, so like the really big piece here, so the bind rendering execution, and the fact that they put this in here means that it was a lot of work inside of um, inside of the 5.4 rendering section, and it's just saying that they've essentially redone a huge bit of low level RHI, the render hardware interface, reworking to support specifically the Vulkan ray tracing specification. Um, so what they're saying here is that for 5.4 release, the feature is supported on majority of platforms which are SM6 capable. It's considered experimental, but so Android would not be SM6 capable, be
Mhm.
SM5, right? Um, but for example, Linux, being able to do being on feature parity is huge, and it seems like it's just about there, which I think is so cool. Obviously experimental,
Yeah.
but this has a huge, as I've said in the past on the podcast, this has a huge impact on studios and the ability to utilize Unreal with more types of infrastructure in your build pipelines, in your studios, everything else. So really awesome feature.
Yeah, and, to be clear, I was actually mistakenly, thinking that what is being announced in 5.4 was actually this other feature that, we talked about back before Unreal Fest. Oh, yeah, and actually, this was the thing that we accidentally saw on the roadmap too early,
Oh yeah,
and
well,
Epic was like, "Ah, that was an accident, take it down." But desktop renderer on mobile devices, that's what I was referring to. They posted this,
ah,
right before Unreal Fest, and this is actually still on the forward looking tab, so they haven't even moved that to something we'll see in 5.4 yet.
right, right. So in theory, mobile devices support Vulkan, like Android supports Vulkan. But yeah, I think it's a matter of different render paths and limitations with Vulkan on mobile. But yeah, this is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
The fact that we can actually get as close as possible to other platforms on Linux. Um,
Yep.
the other really big one here that could slip through is the RHI render parallelization.
Oh, yeah, my eyes completely glazed over when seeing that, so please tell me what's great about it.
Well, I mean, so typically speaking, in a lot of Unreal projects, you have a few main thread, like CPU threads, for your game. So you have the game thread, which is for game logic, your blueprints, your all your tick functions, and all that sort of active logic. You have your game thread, your animation thread, usually for calculating animation poses, positions, stuff like that. And then the render thread. I'm simplifying here. I'm someone who's in deep in this stuff. I'm sure will correct me, but then you have the render thread, which is what issues the actual draw calls to your GPU. So a draw call is you give the GPU some geometry, you give it your shaders, and then you tell it to actually render the thing, more or less. And the render thread usually, particularly for large scenes that have lots of textures, or I believe with Nanite, it hits the render thread pretty hard to do the like geometry compression and calculate, and I assume Lumen as well. Like any sort of CPU operation that interacts with the GPU um, tends to bottleneck very easily on the render thread.
Mhm.
So what they're saying here is that they have dramatically improved the render thread performance, and that's a big deal because that gives you a ton more um, headway, or not headway, headspace, not headspace either. What is the word I'm looking for, Alex?
Overhead?
Headroom,
Headroom,
headroom.
okay.
a, a lot more headroom for to do more complex things in your scene. So they're saying in 5.0 is 24 milliseconds, 5.4 in serial is 21, and 5.4 in parallel is 10.5. And what that means, what they're saying serial versus parallel, is that when you're issuing draw calls to the GPU, older rendering APIs like OpenGL, for example, required that you issue these draw calls one at a time. And the reason for that is that you have to have the right geometry and shaders in the GPU's memory before you can do those things. But according to this note here, they've vastly improved the ability to parallelize those operations over potentially multiple actual CPU threads. Um, and yeah, that's a huge performance gain. That's going to make it a big difference.
Yeah, they, as an example, they say the city sample, the one that was used with the Matrix and all that, which came out in 5.0, that it runs twice as fast in 5.4, which is
Yeah.
pretty incredible.
And we're talking specifically about the render thread, so it's not
Right.
directly related to performance because it's a factor of hardware and other things. But I would say what this does indicate is that, especially for mobile devices, for things that don't have newer CPUs or have tighter energy budgets, where you're usually bottlenecked on things like this is going to make a huge difference. So that's pretty exciting. That's
Very nice.
um, other than that, I mean, in this section, there's so much cool stuff. We could spend a lot of time in this section. The large world coordinates, that's pretty cool. So in Unreal 5, they introduced large world coordinates because previously, I don't remember what it was, Alex, but I want to say it was like 10 kilo. It was something pretty small where the maximum
Oh,
size
they say
of
right here 21 kilometers.
21 kilometers. Yeah. So they did that for your game thread, meaning like all your blueprints and logic. You could extend those scripts to include coordinates much larger. What I believe they are talking about here is, for example, being able to calculate materials over much larger world coordinates. So for procedurally generating landscapes or procedurally generating enormous, large world materials, this is pretty cool. This is a really cool. Seems like it's made for a lot of the virtual texturing, virtual geometry stuff that's being included in the engine. Yeah, I hope we get to see a really cool, like large procedural world game in Unreal sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
I'm curious, real quick, with hardware ray tracing, because that, of
Yeah.
course, already exists, but they say substantial improvements, speed gains of 2x, case of primitives. Yeah, they want to make sure. We might have talked about this on a previous episode, but it was interesting to see the reports that the early games coming out in Unreal Engine 5.0 weren't using hardware ray tracing at all. They weren't even giving it as an option. So if you wanted to use Lumen and those kinds of features, it would only do it through software ray tracing. And it sounded like it was because no one was happy with the performance level that you were getting from that. So this seems like a step in the right direction for making hardware ray tracing a more viable option for games.
Yeah, there was a really great talk at Unreal Fest this last year about making that decision between hardware and software. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to even attempt to quote it, but if I can find it, I'll try and include it in our notes. But yeah, there was a real decision there. Like the intuition says, yeah, use the hardware. You got a hardware device to do it, but there was some nuance there. So hopefully this means that it simplifies the decision for people. Like if you have the hardware, use it. If not, like stick with software.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's keep scrolling just so we
Sure.
aren't here all day. HLOD editor, server streaming, several
Yeah, I
partitions.
mean the
Yeah,
world building stuff I mean nothing here stands out to me particularly. The Yeah, I mean this seems about what I would expect. PCG, huge
oh
upgrades,
yeah,
a lot of node upgrades, which I think is cool. Seeing the way that they're formatting these new nodes, bringing more functionality there. They're really going all in on this clearly. Um, the native level to PCG asset is pretty cool.
mm,
So yeah, okay. Yeah, so you essentially import the data from a level into PCG actors or data assets so that um, you can directly manipulate them in PCG. I think that's pretty cool.
that's
Because what
awesome.
you used to have to do is uh, load the actor geometry data into PCG, or previously like the geometry scripting stuff,
Hmm.
and then use that to generate a new actor. And you had to do that like one actor at a time. So
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Um, yeah, lots of interesting stuff here. Um, the developer iteration section, I will take a moment to talk about. That's right below here.
yeah.
There's a lot going on here. And I'm nerding out about this a little bit because it has a big impact on the usability for larger teams, especially those who utilize cloud and other types of compute. Um, so first of all, the Unreal Cloud DDC,
Drive data cache.
yeah, is very cool. Presumably, it's just S3. So they previously released the ability to use S3 or object storage as your drive data cache. So for those who don't know, object storage is just it's a different type of storage that I'll keep the lecture here short, but like standard hard drives were not designed to work in the cloud.
Mhm.
Um, it when like hardware and file systems were designed, it was just not designed for high latency. So S3 is kind of, it breaks away from that. It's not designed in a hierarchy like file systems, like folders and subfolders, stuff like that. So it's designed to be really scalable in terms of the number of files you're storing and how you retrieve them. So they had an integration with S3, which is really cool because that means you can distribute your assets across teams and potentially multiple regions across the world, wherever you need to. This just seems like a formalization of that to some extent,
Yeah.
as well as a nice AWS plug in there. But this is cool because this, along with the actual introduction of Horde, which has been kind of sneakily living in the background. And there's a card here on Horde. Is so Horde is a system for doing what we call CI/CD, meaning really in terms of games, it's like a build process. So like being able to dynamically build your games in the cloud so that you don't like tie up developers' workstations, for example, and having a scalable way to do that. And this has been living in the background for a while. Like the files were in Unreal, there was not a lot of content in there. You couldn't really go and deploy it. But this is a really cool thing because it brings together the full ecosystem. So that's not just Epic that has a lot of custom tools, and have invested so much time in developing in-house tooling. Like these are the sorts of tools that other studios can use to get up to speed with like adapting their build pipelines or their data processing and movement pipelines and stuff like that. So this is really cool. I'm really excited about this. I mean, Zen, if I remember clearly, is again just like their implementation of a DDC cache that can also run in the cloud. But yeah, really cool stuff here. I believe Zen is also where like they're building in the functionality for and this is total guess for the revision for like versioning like they did in UEFN.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully this means we're close to seeing that functionality as well. So yeah, really excited about this stuff. It's boring for most people, especially the section developer iteration, but for studios, this means that they get a lot of tooling that they can start working with and picking up Unreal faster.
Cool. Motion graphics. Yeah, this is the thing that most people have been talking about already is like, wow, so many new animation tools and shape tools. And I'm embarrassed that I haven't actually played with it much yet. My big question is, can all these things work outside of just the motion graphics setup? Like, could you also use this for, I'm looking at like the effectors here. Could I do something that generates a city and has some cool implications for ArcViz here? Can this work in VR? I'm not sure. Do you know, Jacob?
I do not. I mean, I think this has some huge effects on, again, people's workflows. So previously, you would have hired a motion graphic designer that probably did something like After Effects or what's the alternative in the Adobe stack?
After Effects is in the Adobe stack.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking maybe Autodesk.
Well, I don't know what the Autodesk equivalent is.
Yeah, there's a few of these. There's a
sure.
few motion. I think After Effects is the most popular, if I remember clearly, for motion graphics. But this just means, once again, if you're, for example, hiring teams to do motion graphics for your replays, or if you're building a game like a competitive game that does kill cams and has intro animation with these cool graphics, like I'm thinking about games like Overwatch or Valorant or any of those. Like this just means, again, one less tool that you need, because then you can have folks working directly in here. And it seems pretty well featured. Now, I'm not a motion graphic designer, so I don't know what's missing here. But man, I'm assuming they're using this in Fortnite, and yeah, really cool to see how much functionality is here in this release.
Yeah, I'm excited for that as well. I'm sure we'll talk about it more when we are playing with it, or maybe we'll have a guest on.
Yeah,
maybe we'll get Jonathan Winbush on sometime, and he can talk about all the cool stuff he's been playing with on there.
Yeah, I would love to get a motion graphic designer on to talk about that stuff.
Anything about audio here? Harmonix plugin. That's interesting.
So under platform, there's a Lumen on mobile card.
Lumen. Oh, there we go. Okay. Experimental support for Lumen on recent mobile devices using the
Same guy.
desktop deferred rendering path. Uh-huh. All right.
It's there.
Yeah. And there we go. Vision Pro support. Ha ha ha. Oh, pixel streaming on Mac. Oh, was that not possible before? Okay. Good job, TensorWorks.
Where were Windows and Linux? Oh, it's ARM. So during the last Mac release, or I think it was maybe during the Vision Pro release, they sneakily introduced like a, a virtualization thing that allowed you to port DirectX commands to Metal, if I remember clearly. And there's also some new stuff that does Vulkan to Metal that was snuck into the OS. So I'm wondering if they're using some of that. I certainly we know the folks to ask, but yeah, it's interesting. I'm not really sure why you would want to render your game on a Mac, but hey, someone's clearly asked for it. So
it's there.
So it's there.
Boom.
Punch.
UST stuff. Yeah, good to see UST still making its way as a first party citizen.
Yep.
GLTF export and round trip both ways.
Where does it say that?
Over in that same.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
UST.
Yeah, because normally I think you could typically only export out of Unreal Engine as FBX, so being able to do GLTF is very nice.
Yeah, and so okay, yeah, a lot of USD and import export updates. That's cool.
Oh yeah, USD export.
All right, and then man, it's always such a long list. Dude.
I know.
They crank out features.
Yes.
Now I'm down to I'm the same place you are. I think.
Character.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot.
VFX, lightweight emitters. That seems interesting.
Physics-based character movement looks kind of fun. Yeah. Just the ability to.
Ooh, Niagara asset browser. That's pretty cool. Being able to like watch the effects and have a single page for that. That's pretty cool.
Where do you see that?
Under simulation VFX. I think I'm in next section.
Oh, asset browser. Oh yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's nice.
That's pretty cool. Physics-based character movement.
Networked physics. That's always nice. Proper replication.
Chaos panel pattern cloth editor. That's cool.
Oh yeah. Huh. Yeah, and especially with the new announcement of Marvelous Designer being such a close something that, I think they say you're going to get a year free of it or something like that. And in some cases, maybe it stays free. I'm blanking on the details right now, but there was a nice announcement at GDC about Marvelous Designer and Epic Games Now. And so making that workflow into the native cloth editor and simulation is going to be great.
Right. All right. Editor.
Python.
Multi-user remote function call. That's cool. You can call a blueprint function on another client, so you can like fuck with each other's.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
you can really mess with your colleagues.
Yeah. Multi-user actor replication. That's cool. Real-time actor. Interesting. Which should be replicated. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
The movie render graph. I saw someone giving a preview of this online. Yeah. This is pretty cool. Just kind of a node-based version of all the stuff you do in the movie render queue.
Yeah. So this was. I've heard some interesting information about this. In that, really, probably a lot of this functionality will end up in movie render queue. This was driven by actually the motion graphics crowd to build this. And render graph has been around, I think, now since 5.2.
Okay.
But hasn't been really publicized very much. But maybe movie render graph is different than render graph because it has the word movie in it. But this is cool. This is really cool. Again, it goes back to what it means for studios who are using this for things like VFX. Yeah, being able to to utilize a procedural system for generating renders and distributing renders, I think is really cool.
Yeah. I was trying to see if I could find the video that I stumbled on because someone was actually previewing this. Not coming up right away, but yeah, it does seem
Yeah.
like a cool pipeline. Also, render
Oh,
layers have
huge.
existed for a while, but it seems like they're simplifying the ability to have this work because right now it's a little bit of a maze to make sure you have all the right checkboxes and settings done in order to get these proper layers exported.
Yep.
Virtual production.
Multi-process.
Oh, great. We've scrolled
Oh,
down to the bottom.
multi-process interfreshment. That's cool.
Yeah.
Being able to split that up.
Yeah.
LiveLink Hub seemed interesting.
Yeah, just
Um,
a kind of a one-stop shop place for anything related to LiveLink,
it's an
including going
external
out to
app.
UEFN.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's an external app, and it can rebroadcast them to sessions. Um, yeah, very cool. Very cool. So it's like, yeah, it's a place to feed all your different tracking and different features through.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
the first thing that comes to mind for me here for LiveLink is a lot of times when we've dealt with LiveLink, we end up with kind of the same consume input problem that you can have with like keyboard controls and that kind of stuff in Unreal, where only one thing can take in that data. So I'll give an example when we have like Ari Tar doing his performance as Scrooge, we are trying to send his mocap data out to everyone, but then because of that kind of single point where it needs to go to, it's hard for him to see his own mocap data. So yeah, this seems like maybe the LiveLink Hub would allow for more distribution of that data in real time.
Yeah.
LiveLink VCam for Android. There's a third-party version of that people have been waiting or there is a third-party version of that. People have been waiting for a first-party version for a long time. Virtual Scouting and the XR Creative Framework are both related. This is basically the ability to make your own custom VR mode if you want to be in the editor. I haven't gotten to play with this much yet, but it's very exciting. You can just kind of build out these panels as UMGs however you want, and then kind of set someone up to be in VR, building out whatever kinds of tools you want. So I would mark that as critical for me. And I think we can probably end it there. Oh, virtual camera for Mac too. That's nice.
Yeah. Oh man. All right.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
lot.
we made it right at an hour 20, as
Oh, we're
always.
not done yet though, because I do want to give a
Oh.
very, very quick little tutorial.
All right. Let's do it.
All right, real quick. Let me try sharing my screen. Takes a second to do the screen share here. So yeah, as I mentioned, I have had a lot of people say that they would like more tutorials. So here's a quick one. We are going to look at this. So I try to teach my kids Unreal and Fortnite and all that fun stuff. And hopefully this will come up on the screen. It is, hooray. And so this is a game that we started to make last year where they basically wanted a racing game where you race to the top of a volcano and then you go battle a monster at the top of the volcano. So, I showed them the landscaping tool so they could kind of create the racetrack, and I created the monster up at the top. We're not going to go all the way to the top. And there's some fun obstacles that kind of spawn and you deal with trying to get rid of them. But at a certain point, the kids were like, well, what if you want a different car? What if you want to run? What if you want to do all sorts of other things? And I thought, okay, well, there are different game modes and different templates that you can import for all that stuff. But I wasn't sure immediately what the best way would be to actually jump to those different game modes. And eventually, I found that I was trying a bunch of really complicated things that weren't working. But then it turned out it actually wasn't very hard at all. And so here's what I've got where the tab key basically cycles between a few different things that you can drive or, use at any given moment. My favorite transition is probably going right from, being in a car to running around, especially because we gave our mannequin here some super speed. So in some cases, he's actually faster than a car and can do bigger jumps and, dodge all the obstacles and all that. Though it is physics based, so you can actually get smacked around. But anyway, and then he slides around. So just to give a quick sense of how something like that works is, of course, the easiest place to start is by adding in those different features. So, third person game mode, first person if you wanted to do that, virtual reality if we wanted a virtual reality mode, and vehicle. Because of the enhanced input system, it's very straightforward to have all of those things active and working, which is great. But by default, you're going to have to do only one at a time. Over in your world settings, you kind of have your game mode, and it's like, okay, vehicle game mode, third person game mode. And then if you try to grab another one of those pawns, you might be in some trouble. So the way to get around that most part is actually to think about the player controller. And I'm being a little bit lazy with it here because the only player controller that really has something special going on out of all these templates is the vehicle player controller. So I am using that, though in theory you could, completely customize your own, especially if you wanted to have some different game modes. It's pulling up on my other screen. It looks like this. So pretty straightforward for the vehicle. But yeah, I'm just calling it directly because it doesn't actually hurt the third person player controller or VR or anything like that. And then I've got a default pawn class, but what's actually happening is over in the level editor, I've got the tab key doing what I think is kind of the root of what I wanted to today. It also works with an Xbox controller, game face button bottom, and I'm just using multigate. Multigate again. Oh, you can't see this. That's weird. Why can't you see my window there? Oh, probably because it counts as a separate window. One moment here. I'll try sharing my entire screen instead. Share screen. Entire screen. That. There we go. Okay. Yes. So in the level blueprint, this is kind of the core functionality where we have multigate. Multigate, again, was created in, I think, the very first version of Unreal as a way to kind of swap weapons. And so all I've done is slap loop onto this. And so basically, every time you press tab or face button bottom on your controller, it goes and cycles between option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, starting at 0, of course, because it's essentially an array. And all I'm doing is I'm spawning each of these pawns. And just to make it a little bit interesting, so everything's not spawning on top of each other, I'm making the spawn point the player camera manager. So it's not spawning at the actual location of each pawn, it's spawning where your camera is. So that's how you end up with this effect of everything is always kind of spawning a little bit behind each of the existing pawns, which is fun in itself of just having kind of a big line of all these different things. So I'm doing player camera manager, get actor transform, throwing that into spawn transform for each of the different pawns that I want to use, sports car, third person player, off road car, and ship. The ship, of course, is a custom one that we built based on the car. And then the only important thing is when you're spawning these, you need to make sure that you've set these to auto possess player. So if I open up the sports car pawn, this is an option that isn't ever on by default. But if we type in auto possess player, you see I've set that here to player 0. And that's how we're making sure that everything works. And that's really it. That's all to be able to seamlessly, I say seamlessly, transition between, these different modes where I'm driving. And you can see we started to play with some different materials as well. I think I was showing the kids how material parameter collections work. We also played with putting the third person character directly into the car just to make it feel a little bit more realistic when the outside of the car disappears. And then, of course, at any given moment, I can do this and then just start running or, transition over to the ship and start driving the ship, which you can also see has that person on there just manning the what's that called? The wheel, the wheel of a ship. Clearly, I've been on a lot of boats before. But yeah, that's it. I hope that is helpful to everyone. And that's really all I wanted to say. I'm really excited seeing all the tests people are doing with Apple Vision Pro right now. And with Unreal Engine 5.4, it's always cool how Unreal continues to give everyone access to, source control. So not only can you be doing the stuff coming out for 5.4, but you can do the stuff that's coming out in 5.5, like skeletal mesh, nanite tessellation, and all that. So I like this community, Jacob. It's a cool community.
Oh yeah, nothing like it. I mean, yeah, there's so much cool stuff happening, and the engine is getting so powerful. I thought it was powerful when I started, right? But man, it's really getting to a point where you don't need to install much else, and it's a beautiful thing. It
Yeah.
really is.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that, if we're all set, I'll tell people to like, rate, comment, subscribe, wherever it is, wherever you're listening or watching. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks to Vikas Reddy and the Light Twist team for our virtual studio. Thanks to Alan, our producer, and looking forward to the next episode, which who knows might be with the official release of 5.4, or maybe we'll get a special guest, maybe a motion graphic artist ahead of
Yeah.
time. But yeah, we'll see y'all next time. Thanks.
All right.